Hello, my friends. It's John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and you've stumbled your way into Quartet, and we're very happy to have you with us here today. We get together like this every couple of weeks to kind of plumb deeply into some of the biggest questions associated with this amazing and extraordinary kind of change that we're happening, that's going on around this world, that's consuming all of us. And we come to you from Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, our little resort town just 100 miles down the road from Washington and Baltimore. And this is one of a number of things we'll mention in passing that the Arlington Institute does. And so I'm joined today, as we always are, by my friends Penny Kelly. Hello, Penny. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. I'm glad to be here.
And Gregg Braden. How are you, Gregg?
Doing well. I'm coming to you today from our Santa Fe studio and looking forward to this program.
And Kingsley Dennis from the UK.
Hello, John. Hello, everyone. Greetings from the UK.
So great to have you all and see you all again. What's on my mind is that this last weekend at Transition Talks, David Martin was our speaker. What he's talking about uniquely about, though, is what he said is that, and he built the data points and the documents and the things, and he said they're planning an EMP attack in October, and that it's a derivative of, you could see it in the executive decision that Biden had made earlier in February and so on. And that alone is a pretty galvanizing kind of idea. And he talked a good bit about that. The reason I bring this up is because a number of people in the questioning afterwards, we didn't have any time for questions because the thing was a full afternoon. But afterwards they said, so how do you prepare for that? What would you do for this financial thing? How would you prepare for something like an electromagnetic pulse attack that would kind of take out in certain areas, at least, the internet and a lot of the things that we depend upon? And I thought that I'd raise that as a potential next subject for us to talk about here at Quartet. But in any case, that was an extraordinary kind of talk that he did. And for those of you who are watching here that might be interested in that, you can find the replays for that on transitiontalks.org. Last week, or the last episode, we had Tracy Lee send us a very long and thoughtful kind of question about how you build community. She said, do you feel there are steps we can take at this time other than working on technology to reach there, basically weaning us off of the bottle toward results for community independence between 2025 and 2027? I feel if we try to tackle the smaller steps instead of looking at the larger picture and end result, number one, you believe humanity will be more comfortable taking on small changes. We're not good at change at all, big change. And number two, learning as we move forward that will be invaluable. And number three, most have this tendency, including myself, to wait for trauma and extreme fear, absolutely, till the stuff hits the fan before we decide to change. And with that said, I am in hopes that you can provide some solutions and guidance, if able, to lead in a direction where those who have innovative ideas and like-minded groups or communities could help to change peacefully as possible into a beautiful new world. Thanks for your time and looking forward to your thoughts. I thought that that was a very important and central kind of question, an issue about this whole transition process. That no matter how you talk about getting from here to there, you cannot do this by yourself. Perhaps if you're some aesthetic and you go up to the mountain and you can meditate and never do and not eat and anything else, maybe you can make yourself through. But for the rest of us, we've got to live down here, and we're in the part of this whole community. We're in the 3D world, and that's part of the experience that we all are an integral part of this experience of being humans and making our way through this whole kind of process. So we need to find community, and we need to find like-minded people. And let me just start off by suggesting that to my way of thinking, there's kind of 4 basic kind of requirements that need to happen in this kind of space. And one of them is that you need a purpose, and trying to bring a group together to build a community, find a community. You have to have a purpose, and it needs to be kind of explicit. You know, may not be a big statement of one sort, but you got to be able to tell people what you're trying to do and what you want to do, and it's worth thinking about what that might be. You also have to have a way to identify potential people that are going to be in your community. And so we can talk about that a little bit. How do you reach out? How do you find the folks who are the right kind of candidates for what you're trying to do? Because we all know that if you pick the wrong kind of folks, and certainly in a situation like this, it could be very disruptive and problematic. You also need to be able to effectively communicate with them in one way or another. It's not enough just to be able to identify these folks, but you have to meet, you need a collaborative kind of engagement and in process. And I'm making that broad because, you know, the internet's here, and we can talk like we all do every couple of weeks. We can, you know, we're a little small community about trying to think about these kinds of things, but that's not quite what Tracy's talking about here. She's trying to say, how do you kind of on a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis, how do you get together with folks who are kind of supportive? And so you have to have a connection, and you need, I would argue, some kind of proximity. And I don't know what that means necessarily in this case. Certainly, if you live in a physical community, if we're talking about a physical community of folks who we get together on a regular basis.
The most important aspect of a community is the people. And in fact, just I think yesterday I was reading some work, and I came across this quote, which I thought was useful. It's from a guy called J.G. Bennett, who was a Gurdjieffian who had groups. And he mentioned in the early 1970s, and I just quote here, if this new world is going to be based on communities, as I believe it will, the first requirement is that people shouldn't be slaves to their likes and dislikes. If you can get rid of that slavery, a community will always work. It's not just the physical resources, and the question that Tracy was right in saying it's not just about the technology. I think we have to focus on the fact that a community is an energetic space. You know, you can be in the same space, but you're not necessarily having the same resonance. It's the psychological issues, the psychological, let's say, difficulties, which usually can be the downfall of a community. It can be the make or break if you can get a psychological understanding and a balance. So it's the inner life of the community, which is perhaps more or important than just the outer life. And another thing you mentioned also is about the motivations and intentions of the community. You talked about purpose. I would also put in the belonging. If there's a communal sense of belonging amongst the people, not just I want to survive and a scrambling, but a long-term vision. Because if you have just a short-term myopic, I want to live hand to mouth for tomorrow, then that's not sustainable. I think, you know, you need a kind of long-term vision. And this is only my own suggestion. My own suggestion would be, I would also incorporate a metaphysical understanding in that a community is not just working with the active and passive forces of people. You have a trust and understanding that there's other forces coming in. There's other assistance if you can kind of allow that to come in. And the final thing I would say, John, the final thing is that there's been a lot of talk about parallel communities. And a parallel community would be a community that exists within the present society or the present failing society, but doesn't seek to conflict with it. It seeks to exist within it, like a new seed that's growing, rather than being a kind of revolution resistance community. So I feel that coherence, even if society around you or other communities are not kind of in aligned with you, you still have to exist amongst the confusion that's going outside.
In the early 1990s, when I left the corporations, I left in 1990 and moved into a rural area in northern New Mexico, an hour from the nearest grocery store, 4 hours from the nearest airport. And there were other people in the area that moved because the same reasons that I did, because of the beauty, because of the land, because of the light, because of the isolation. And what's interesting is people tend to not be communal when they move to locations like that. So what happened was we had developers from Chicago that saw these vast expanses of land as being wasted because they weren't developed. And they had proposals to come through with an airport, with a 4-lane highway, with golf courses. And it forced these people that are typically very private to come together for a common good, to preserve the land that we had all been drawn to. And what happened when we first got together, John, we had to identify the parameters that would bring us together. And I pulled out some of the papers. When we did this, we all identified that we had common values that we shared for our families and for our children, that made life, it wasn't an easy life, but it was a good life, close to the land, close to nature, and self-sufficient, but supporting one another. So the community came together based, number one, on values. Number two was purpose. The purpose was to preserve the things that we love and cherish about where we lived, so we'd have it for ourselves and our children. Number three was respect for one another, a deep respect. So I'll make a long story very short. My primary degree is as a geologist. Using geologic maps, we took this case to the Capitol in Santa Fe in a legal case against the developers, and we won based not on emotion, but on the principles of groundwater usage and how it wouldn't support what was happening, and it could only happen with the support of the community. But here's what happened. In the midst of coming together for that purpose, people got to know one another, and they decided they like one another. But these core ideas, the values, the purpose, respect, commitment, and trust, at least in our community, John, we found them to be important. Now, technology has changed the idea of community. And community can be spread geographically. We certainly found that during COVID, where we have digital communities and we have online communities, and some of them are physical and some are not. So these same principles can apply whether we're in a physical location or not.
I want to talk about the work of Susan Davis. Susan Davis Mora, she started out way back when, did a whole bunch of things, ended up as the vice president of Harris Bank in Chicago. She developed this concept called triple bottom line accounting and began to spread that. She began to be involved in all kinds of efforts to get people back in touch with nature, with their neighborhood, etc. Long story short is that she created this system for creating groups. She called it the KINS Network. So here's, I just want to read her brief outline of KINS Networks because it lays out the kind of thinking that you have to have in order to put any kind of community together. And she says, choose an organizer whose life mission is to manifest a globally conscious economy that is good for all. It has to be in line with the actual mission, which could be whatever the group happens to want. Choose a mission statement that is inspiring, daunting, and measurable in less than 14 words. Identify the top sectors that could most help you achieve your goal. As many as 30 sectors. More than that, it gets to be too chaotic. Within each sector, do research to find the servant leader whose peers say they have these qualities: high credibility in their field, give back the most, have a reputation for integrity. I think that's it, those 4 things. And then you put together the, you begin to meet, you put on the coffee, you pick a meeting date, or you get the Zoom link and you put it on, you know, you have a community that's digital, and you begin to talk about what are we trying to create? You identify the values. There are certain behaviors and strategies. All of these are laid out on a website called kinshipearth.org. And I would suggest for people that are ready to begin putting a community together, you go there and you download Susan's book, Trojan Horse of Love. She's laid out all these strategies. Number 1, the strategy is generosity. You know, all the things like that are laid out. It's not overwhelming. And I'll tell you what, it makes some really powerful groups of people who organize and make things happen.
Yeah. Well, your comments all remind me that here at the Transition Talks, when we get a whole lot of people together from around the East Coast and other places in the country, inevitably, I'll have 1 or 2 folks that'll come up after me and say, how do I get something like this started, or not something like this, but how do I find people who are, this place has got just full of all of these people who are wonderful and all supportive, and how do I find those? Because I don't have any of those where I am. And what I mean, literally, I've had 2 or 3 just this last weekend ask me about that. How do I do this? Well, what I always say is move to Berkeley Springs because we've got a lot of community here and a lot of like-minded people. And my only point is that you don't have to work and move to Berkeley Springs, but that might be one of the options that we haven't talked about. And that is to get on your horse and move somewhere else to where it's more compatible with, you know, what you're interested in and the kind of people. And so that you'll be around those who are supportive of what you're trying to do. Well, thank you. Thank you again for another wonderful conversation. For those of you who are viewing, this comes to you from the Arlington Institute here, as I said, in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. We have a variety of things that we do back here. We do transition talks where people like Penny and Gregg, and whenever we can, if we can ever get Kingsley extracted out of the UK, we'll get him back here to talk and all about how do you get from here to there? What is this new world going to look like? How do you prepare? How do you transition from here to there? We've got a newsletter called Future Edition. All of these things are available on our website. You can find out far more about it at arlingtoninstitute.org, and we encourage you to go. Tell your friends, share, click, all of those kinds of things to if you like what we're doing here, we'd love to have you do that. So let's finish up by saying, what do you think is going to happen in the next couple of weeks? We can start with Kingsley and then Penny and Gregg.
Well, thanks, John. I started today's program by talking about the creation of certain points of discomfort. And I think, especially in Europe, from this perspective, there's increasing discomfort around the energy sector. And there's been you've probably heard about the on and off of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline to Germany, which feeds Europe. But in the news, there's a lot of kind of waves of preparing people for the discomfort by saying, well, we may have to ration your energy soon. We may have to tell you to take, lesser showers, or we may have to start rationing. So I feel there's going to be more of this constructed narrative around creating an energy-based discomfort zone, increasingly so in the weeks ahead.
Yeah. Penny?
I think that what I see coming the next 2 weeks that concerns me is what's going to happen today at the Fed, which will be a raise of interest rates. And what I see is that starts this pretty steady slide that becomes more and more dramatic as we move over the next couple of weeks. I'm hoping that people will kind of, be okay. I hope people have been watching that, are ready for that. Because it's the first step in this whole array of wallops that we're going to get over
Yeah.
the next 5 months.
Yeah, one after another, I think. Greg?
Yeah, I'm going to follow on with what both Penny and Kingsley have just said. As a systems thinker, I'm looking at this big picture and how the decisions the current administration is making are setting the U.S. up to fail. And they're setting the U.S. up to fail economically, financially, in terms of energy, and in terms of the breakdown of social alliances to make way for a new social structure. And when you begin looking at what's happening from that perspective, you can see where elements are every week. They pick one and then they'll pick another and another and another. So Penny, I'm on board with you and Kingsley as well. It's going to be about energy and finances this week and next week.
Yeah, well, I'd agree with you, Greg. I think that you got food and energy and finance and healthcare and shortages and economic and the collapse of the economic system. And they're working really hard to try to get that going. And at the same time, you're getting a lot of pushback around the world against some of these kinds of things. And you hope the curves cross here in sometime soon. And the pushback gets bigger than the attempts to kind of collapse the system. So, well, thank you all for the discussion. Thank you for those of you who are our viewers. We appreciate it very much. Come back and see us in 2 weeks. And until then, we'll see you. Take care. Goodbye.
Thank you all so much.
There's
Yeah.
now
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.